park in your normal assigned spot. Most Baptists have an assigned pew and an assigned parking spot. We did one time, we were in Effingham, we were going to have to seal and restripe and do some serious work to a parking lot. And we had, I don't know, 220 spaces, and it was going to be a pretty significant amount. And we kind of talked about, we could just ask everybody to pay for their spots. And the old-time congregational churches in New England area, you paid pew rent. At the beginning of the year, you paid the rent on your pew. And for the record, the pews in front cost more than the pews in the back. In Baptist church, it would be different. Those seats back there would cost 3 times as much as these up here. So it could be a lot of different things. So, I want to begin by praying for what's going on outside, for soccer and relationships, and evidently there's been a lot of new faces, is what I've heard, families that have not been involved before, and so I need somebody to volunteer to just voice a prayer for all of that that's going on right now. Thank you, Barry, you volunteered. You didn't know you volunteered, but you did, and you'll feel good about it. But I want you to do that for us.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. So wonderful, Lord, that we have just a chance that we can share the gospel with these children and their parents. It's such a blessing to see the parking lot full. Lord, guide us as we are with these children and their parents, and look for the opportunities that you will give us to share the gospel, which is the most important thing, Lord, eternal life with you. Thank you, Lord. Be with Pastor Roger tonight as he gives us the message. Guide and lead him in tonight's service. And we love you and give thanks to you for all things. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, I want to do a couple things. One is this is a little bit more expanded sheet than what you had on Sunday morning. I started doing this about 5 or 6 years ago. Just honestly, I had a couple come in, and they were talking about trying to settle their dad's estate. And it was just a nightmare. They couldn't find things. They didn't know where titles were. They thought he told them there was insurance, and they had no clue about where the insurance was. He had come home, retired. I hate to tell you this, he retired, and the very next week, about 5 or 6 weeks later, had a heart attack and just died. And they trying to figure out how to do things. And so that's kind of where I got started. I think I'll run down some of this stuff real quick. But then after I did this, setting your house in order financially, then did the funeral thing, and then this other sheet is about setting your house in order in the concept of simplicity. So we'll maybe that's where I really want to go tonight. But I wanted to start down some of this stuff, and some of you have great experience, and you know how many of you have wills? Okay, a lot of you got that, so you're covered on lots of the stuff. But bottom line, number one, you need a will. The will has an executor. That's the person who executes what you said. Beneficiaries get the stuff. Guardians for minor children. That doesn't happen very often, but I can almost guarantee you if a court comes in and they start appointing guardians, they don't really care about faith. They don't care about manner of life. They have certain things they look at, and they may or may not choose the guardians that you would. Signatures, yours, and witnesses. Typically, if they get money from the will, they shouldn't be a witness. If they're getting money. Now, my son-in-laws are not named in our wills, and I had them all be the witnesses. Because my daughters would get money. Technically, they won't. Some people have said that's a little bit. But as far as where you get a will, an attorney, you're going to pay $800 to $1,500 to $2,000 for simple wills. If you're married, you each need a will individually. And one names the other. You can do it that way. free wills work. I put on some Law Depot, do your own will, free wills for you. Those are all good. Your will must be state specific. So if you go to one of those sites, you got to say Illinois. And there are certain things about an Illinois will that are just a little bit different. Those are all perfectly legal. Normally, when you get on those sites, they'll say, you know, this is free, but for $40, you can do this and your living will and something else, and we'll give you another copy. It may be worth the $30 or $40 to do those things. I basically went to one of those sites, and I just took the wording and typed the words in and put the people in that I wanted, and that's what my will is. Carol? The Illinois Baptist Foundation typically will give you information about a will, and they will even, if you call IBSA and say foundation, they even have a little will packet that will show you how to do it. Now, they will, of course, want you to consider leaving money to the Baptist Children's Home or to Illinois Baptist or scholarships or something, and that would be fine. My name is spelled with 2 L's. If you want to include me, that's all right. I'm all right with that. But yeah, Roger, I know. Thank you. Any kind of will work. Attorneys, and I visited with some attorneys, and I went to some Christian attorneys, and actually there's some names of attorneys on here that are guys from Effingham, and I didn't retype it up. A lot of them will talk about a trust. And a trust is a much more expensive thing. You can spend $2,000 to $5,000 on a trust. The thing is, well, if you do a trust, you'll save taxes. Well, you might. In the state of Illinois, you don't pay any estate. There are no inheritance taxes until you get to $4 million. And that's you individually. You can have, if you're married, your estate can be $8 million, and your estate's only $4 million. Federal income taxes, there's no estate or inheritance tax until you get to $14 million. Now, I know most of you are over all of that, and I understand. And at that point, a trust might be of value. Farmers, sometimes when you have a lot of acreage and you have a lot of equity in it, there can be a reason for them to do that. Typically, a trust usually is 2 things. One, if you want to do a charitable trust, sometimes you can get to the point of your life and people will say, I want to leave my estate to the Baptist Children's Home. You can set up a trust, and you can live on your money, live on your income, but when you die, it automatically goes to the Baptist Children's Home or whoever you name. The other thing where I've seen trusts work is if there's a special need. For instance, you have a Down syndrome child or grandchild. They will get Medicaid, Medicare, they'll get some assistance, but I've known grandparents who said, I want to take care of them. And I want to set money aside in a trust, and you have an executor. You need an attorney to do a trust. I've known folks who have young grandchildren, and they want to leave money for them, but they don't want them to get at it until 21 or 25. So if you're going to get involved, you need a trust, you need an attorney. Probate, basically any will, eventually a copy gets to the circuit clerk's office, and you file it, it goes on record. Probate is basically a time where if anybody wants to contest the will, they have a certain amount of time to do that. And probate may be there. If you die without a will, you will certainly go to probate court, and a judge will appoint an executor, and the state of Illinois has they call them a boilerplate will, and it's not terrible, but a person who probably doesn't even know you is going to make up all the details. So bottom line, I think it's just a good thing to have a will and have it done. It's always oppressive and depressing to do it, but then once you get it in, you throw it in your box and you don't worry about it. So any questions or comments, or some of you may, I'm not an attorney, don't want to be one, never played one on television or anything of that matter, but I have talked to some good Christian attorneys.
Well, at least sometimes people are misguided. Like, sometimes they will do a trust for privacy issues.
Mm-hmm.
Because a trust is not public.
Yeah, a trust doesn't have to go through probate. And, you know, so there are some reasons for that, and it can be very reasonable. Well, let's jump to advanced directives very quickly. The Illinois DNR, do not resuscitate. If you go to the hospital, you're getting ready to have surgery, they'll stick this in front of you, or they'll say, do you have advanced directives? And if you don't, almost every hospital I know wants you to use the IDNR. Well, the problem with it is you only get two options. Yes, treatment, no treatment. And the truth of the matter is, that doesn't always work. If you're in surgery and maybe you have a stroke or something happens, they may want to put you on resuscitation. They may want to put you on but with the idea that if we can stabilize you for 24 hours, then we can deal with the stroke, and there's a reason sometimes where you may want that. But there's no gray area in the IDNR. It's black or white. And if it says no treatment, you don't get any treatment. And if it says treatment, then they'll give you everything they got. And that may or may not be. I like the living will better because it lets you spell that out. You can write out your faith. You can talk about heaven. You can talk about, I don't want to be a burden. If I'm going to be in a vegetative state in a nursing home and there's a small likelihood that I'll ever recover, I don't want to be kept alive. You can say a lot of those things. But what I really like is durable power of attorney for health care. That's a person. You write everything out just like you did in the living will, but then you designate an individual, and you can have 4 or 5 individuals. So like I said, Karen's mine, but then all 3 of my daughters are on the list as well. And if I'm having surgery, something goes south, that's the way it is. I had bypass surgery. I got this really cool scar. It goes from here down to here. In fact, my mother-in-law said, you know, if you put vitamin E oil on that scar, it'll go away. And I said, that's the single most expensive thing I own. That costs $250,000. I mean, that's a big deal. I want to look in the mirror every morning and say, man, you are worth $250,000. I see it right there. But if something would have happened to me while I was on the table, I mean, they'll do something immediately. They'll do something emergency-wise, but then a doctor would have gone out to the waiting room and said, Karen, here's the deal. He's had this massive stroke. This has happened. This has happened. What is your wishes? And she'd have to make the choice. And understand, if you ask somebody to make it, that's a tough thing. Have any of you ever had to be involved in turning off life support, stopping the feeding tube? Those are hard things, but if you've had the conversation before, it's not so hard. Now, it's always hard, but that's advanced directives. And any comments or thoughts about that? Those are important things to do. Insurance information, by the way, if you're not sure somebody had a life insurance policy, there is a way to go through the Illinois life insurance. There's a regulatory agency. And insurance companies have to try and find who they owe money to if they've died. They're responsible to do that, but they don't always look real hard. So get that in there and update the beneficiaries. Man, I think I mentioned Sunday, just a very difficult divorce. Wife had an affair, left. There was all kinds of different things, but she remarried. The husband, 2 or 3 years later, remarried. Then he died very suddenly. But his life insurance policy had never changed the beneficiary, never thought about it. So his ex-wife, who I guarantee you he would not have wanted to get that money, got all the life insurance. And there's really no way to get around it because that's the way it was. So update your beneficiaries on all those kinds of things. Bank accounts, by the way, jump up, long-term care. That's getting to be more complicated. Dave Ramsey for years said you need to have long-term care as a way of, and here's the deal, if you've got some money in the bank and in a retirement account, long-term care insurance protects that. That's what it's about. Nursing homes, $6,000 a month minimum, and some places it's more. So that's $70,000. So if you've got a $300,000 estate and you go to the nursing home, in 4 years your estate's gone. If you only got $26 in the bank, you really don't need long-term care insurance because you'll just get to Medicare and Medicaid, and you'll get into Medicaid. If you don't have anything to protect, if you got a farm, if you've got some assets and you want to protect them, you do that with long-term care. Long-term care insurance is going through the roof. You can't get it if you don't get it by the time you're 62. And the rates are going up, and the rates can continue to go up. Karen and I have had ours. My mom and dad had it, I think they paid for like 9-10 years. My mom was eligible for it for about 5 months. So they got, I think, about $15,000 in benefits. They paid about $18,000 in for the premiums. But if you're a year in the nursing home, $70,000. If you're 3 years in a nursing home, and I've seen folks much longer than that, so I can't really tell you what to do. Karen and I took out long-term care about 5 years ago when we were 62. I just paid the bill. And we don't have the Cadillac. We've got enough to where if I'm there for a long time, Karen doesn't lose everything. But I think our premiums are, I think for the two of us, it was about $2,600 a year. And it will probably continue to go up. But if you have assets, that's what you're about. You're protecting the assets. And so I don't know. That's, yeah, it goes up every year. And you may or may not get anything back. In fact, it might be nice if you don't get it back, you say, well, at least I didn't have to go to the nursing home. I was hoping for that anyway. I'm really hoping to get a heart attack and just go see Jesus quickly someday. We'll see how that all happens. But bank accounts. We talked about all those things, especially those Swiss bank accounts. Where they are, account numbers. I wanted to talk about this because I went to funeral directors and I said, what do I need to tell people? I went to bankers that I knew and I said, what do people need to know? There is a very common thing that as people get older, to put one of their children's name on an account or on a title or on a deed. And there are some really good reasons for doing that. But you always understand that if somebody's name is on the account, in most cases, if you die, it's their account. Now, my brother has been on my dad's checking account, savings account for years. And he writes checks. And my dad said, now, if I die and there's money left, I want you to share it with your brother and sister. And my brother would, but he wouldn't have to. Now, there are ways that you can, if you talk to your bank, I want my son or my daughter on my account, but I want it to go into my estate when I die. There's a phrase, payable on death. Different banks use different terms, but there are ways that you can put somebody on there and authorize them to write checks and pay bills, but when you die, it's not legally theirs. And you just need to ask your people. Same thing on retirement accounts. If you put their name on it, it may just be theirs. And putting their name on the house. There was a family lived not far from where you grew up. The parents put one child who lived close on the deed. 5 kids. The last parent died. The rest of the family after the funeral wanted to know, because there wasn't really anything else except the house. It was the only thing of value. And they wanted to know, so how are we going to dispose of Mom's house and divide the money? Well, the one whose name was on the deed said, well, it's my house. And preferred to keep the house rather than continue to be friends with their siblings. That just happens. But their name was on the deed, and so it was theirs. So now that's not necessarily a bad thing. And if you really are, if you're up in that $4 million territory, there can be a reason to sign over the house to your children while you're living, and then you live in it. But you also get into some interesting things about how that's going to be valued, the basis for taxes, but if you're not close to $4 million, it really doesn't make much difference. Not really. So, anything about bank accounts? Online access. There's a whole level of scams that are now coming out. When someone dies, there are people who will get online and they will surf for deaths. And then they will see where they lived and was it a nice house. And then they will try and access those accounts and hack into their accounts because they know nobody's watching. And if they can get into online accounts, they will prey on the families of someone who has died. So if you have online accounts, passwords, usernames, all of that stuff, and just let me tell you, I don't know how many times, the only reason I get into my box now is when I can't remember the password for that account, and I got it written in the box, and I can go find it and pull it out, and oh yeah, I haven't used that password in 7 years. But it's there, and I can get to those passwords. So, outstanding loans. If you got a car loan, they're going to want that paid, and your kids are going to know. If you've got a mortgage on the house, if you've done something else. But really where I see this is mom and dad have loaned money to a family member, one of the kids. And the other kids may or may not know about it. And then when it comes time to settle the estate, you got to decide what to do. And I know some people, if I die, just forgive it. That's fine. Or take it out of their share of the estate and pay it back that way. That's fine. I don't think there's any right or wrong, but you need to have a copy, and that needs to be written out, and your executor at some point needs to know how to deal with that loan. Again, property deeds, timeshares. Man, I don't know that you, don't raise your hand if you got a timeshare. They're great things if you like going them. You just can't get rid of those suckers. I mean, you can't give them away. My brother has a timeshare, and it's one where you buy points, and he's got like 76 million points. I don't know. And he thought, it'll be great. I'll leave it to my kids. His kids don't want it. And they can't afford the maintenance costs on it. But at any rate, do with whatever you need to do with that. But again, that all needs to be in the box. Credit card information, and again, that's a place they will scam and they will hit. And you cannot cancel those cards without the right information. You're trying to cancel an online account, trying to cancel a credit card, trying to shut down a Facebook account. It's almost a nightmare to do that. And it's hard when you're grieving, somebody's died suddenly, and all of a sudden there's somebody who's cloned their Facebook account, and it's all over every place. So kind of deal with that. Well, Social Security cards, tax returns, birth certificates, the marriage certificate. I didn't talk much about that, but and it's really not so much when you're older, but there are some benefits, like if somebody was a member of a union and they died, there's probably a death benefit for their spouse. But now these unions are requiring a marriage certificate. And it can be to any gender you want in the state of Illinois, but a certified marriage copy, which is one you get from the county clerk in the county you got married in, if it was in Illinois, and you get that, and they have a stamp, the little raised stamp on it, so you can't just make a photocopy. But that's becoming a new thing. And so 2 of my kids wanted it, so I just went up, and they wouldn't take my word that I had married all 3 of them. I officiated all the weddings, paid for the weddings, didn't get paid for the weddings that I did, but I went up one day and ordered them all 5 copies of the marriage certificate and mailed them to them and said, I'm not in this anymore, you're on your own. The honorable discharge, if you want the flag, if you're a veteran, they also do a little brass plaque from the Veterans Affairs, but you need to have your honorable discharge, and you can get a copy of that. You can get it, but it takes a long, long time. I don't know where, there's probably a Veterans, Marion's got to have a Veterans Affairs office where they can help you get those kind of things, but it will take you a long time to do that. But they'll want that when you go to make funeral arrangements. We talked last week about, the safety deposit box. How many of you got a safety deposit box? Do you know where the key is? Does anybody else know where the key is? I hope so. Somebody ought to know, but that ought to be in your box where you say, here's where my safety deposit, it's this bank, and the key is in the drawer over here, wherever it is, but that's where the key is. But they also have to be on the signature card. Having the key is not enough. It's got to be on the signature card. And if you're the only one, Karen and I had one for a long time, our 2 names were on it. If we'd have died in a car accident, kids couldn't have got into it. They'd eventually had to take, I don't know, what does it take to get into a safe deposit box now? Got to have a death certificate? Probably, I think it used to be a court order. Under certain senses, if you have a death certificate and a will, but very often it's a court order, and then they drill it open, and you got to pay $100 to replace the lock or whatever it is, and there may not be anything in there to begin with. Well, who was it? Wasn't there some reporter that Al Capone's tomb or something? Geraldo Rivera, and they played it up. There wasn't anything in there. May not be anything in your safety deposit box, but you decide. And again, though, that's another fine line. If their signature is on the signature card, technically they can get in at any time and remove anything, and it really technically doesn't go into the estate. Well, legacy letter, I just kind of wanted to run through that a little more quickly. Any questions or comments or observations, or, yeah, we've done this, or I wished we could do this. And on the way home, Karen said, yeah, and you've got 5 of those things you need to get fixed and updated, and we need to do better on. And I said, well, okay, I'm just not going to mess with that anymore. So. Okay, I hope that's at least helpful enough that it reminds you of important kinds of things. Where I got started on this, set your house in order, Hezekiah. So what did he do? And then I just got on a time where I spending time looking at the Bible and the context of the word order. Set your house in order. Well, what all would that mean? In the church, things are to be done in decency and order. There is a spiritual gift that God gave all the spiritual gifts to the church. One of them is the gift of administration. Now, I'll just tell you, I am not a detail guy. I was a math major, but it's because I like solving problems. I like the challenge. I could have never been an actuary or a CPA or, I didn't, just to sit there and add up numbers, that's not my thing. And at church, I was blessed always to have a staff member who was a detail person. And I could say, here's what I want to do. And then they'd work out all the little details, and I'd get credit for it because it looked so good. But the church needs individuals who have this gift of administration, this organization. Karen and I have very often watched the reality show about the hoarders. And it makes me uncomfortable to watch the show. I just can't even think about that. And I have visited in houses like that. My wife will occasionally say, oh, the house is a mess. And I want to say to her, honey, I have been to houses where I didn't want to sit down on anything much. This house is not a mess. I mean, it's not. But this idea of order as a spiritual concept, organization, to keep your life in order. And so part of this box business was, all right, I want this part of my life to be in order so I don't have to worry about it. And I want to be organized enough to be a blessing to other people. So then I played out with that, and of course the funeral plans. But then this idea of biblical simplicity. Spiritual disciplines have been a thing for years. Prayer, meditation, study of the Word, disciplines of fasting. There's a whole host of them. But some years ago I came across the discipline of simplicity. And I've struggled with that. But you understand, throughout most of Christian history, there have been men and women who have said, I want to be so in tune with the Lord that I am going to eliminate everything else. I'm going to go to a monastery. And I'm going to wear simple clothes. And I'm going to take a vow of poverty, and I'm not going to have any money. And I'm not going to worry about any earthly things so that my mind and my spirit can be focused completely and totally on Jesus. Now, I don't agree with some of the theology, but obviously I've known some Catholic nuns. I'm telling you, those ladies had a relationship with Jesus. And I've known some Franciscan friars. There was a monastery in Teotopoulos. And the evangelism they did and the work they went out and the ministries they did, they were Franciscan. Those are the brown guys, the brown and the sandals and vows of poverty. In fact, they gave me a hard time. So, Roger, do you have a vow of poverty? So, well, I'm a Baptist preacher. It feels like it sometimes. But this thing about simplicity, in 2 Corinthians 1:12, Paul writes to that church and says, our boast is this, the testimony of our conscience, that we behaved in this world with simplicity and godly sincerity, not by earthly wisdom, but by the grace of God. Paul said, that's one of the things I'm proud of, that we have chosen to live a simple life. Now, I've struggled with this, and I'm not sure I understand it, but I am convinced that many of us have made our lives a whole lot more complicated than they need to be. Now, getting married was part of the problem. Life was simpler before you got married, wasn't it? Okay, be careful what you said. It wasn't as much fun, but it was simpler. Having kids does not make life simpler. Makes it much more complicated. I thought grandkids would be easier, but doggone it. I spent an hour today trying to figure out how I'm going to go and get one of my kids' dogs to keep this weekend at my house while they go to, I don't know what. Children don't make life simpler. But this thing about being organized and living a life with an order And there's a reason why all of these monastical groups are called orders. Because they set out a certain rule, and this is how we're going to live. Amish, I don't know if you have any friends or know very many, but every Amish group is a part of an order. And they have things written out. This is how we're going to live. And they take very seriously, we're going to live in such a way that our life is not distracted and would keep us from being able to focus on Jesus. And whether you think living without electricity is a good thing or a bad thing, they have simpler lives. And there may be something to that. So, this is just kind of, there are 2 or 3 spiritual discipline books that have come out. Donnie Whitney was a pastor in Northern Illinois. He's now a professor at Southern Seminary, and he's written a book that's now required by every seminary student who goes through Southern, and it's spiritual disciplines, and one of them is simplicity. I came across a book about spiritual disciplines that had 5 that were sort of outward in terms of how you treated people, and 5 were kind of inward, but one of them was the idea of spiritual simplicity. So, financial matters. That is, if you're not aware, the #1 cause of stress in America. This is almost, okay, we got an adult group. It was for a long period of time that the #1 thing that couples in America argued about was sex. #2 was money, and #3 was politics and religion. For the last 15 years, money has moved to #1. It's one of the biggest stressful things. Sex is #2. Politics and religion is still #3. But that happens. It's the stress in marriage. It's the stress in life. There really is something to getting your finances, your obligations, your bills under control to the extent that that is not a stress in your life. Dave Ramsey, and you don't have to like Dave Ramsey or not, but I'll tell you what, there's something good about an emergency fund. This week, somebody said, my air conditioner went out. I was so glad we had some money setting aside for an emergency. Now, it was still stressful, and he was not excited about the $2,500 it cost. But you realize what a grace that is when the $2,500 kicks in, and you can say, thank you, Jesus, you blessed us in the past, and we set aside and we saved it. Dave Ramsey says $1,000 is your first thing in emergency fund, and then he gets to 3 months and 6 months, and you can buy into that, but I will just tell you, it makes life a lot simpler if a flat tire or a transmission or something that just happens, that stuff happens. It just makes life simpler if you got that. Debt is a complication. I understand mortgages. If you're going to buy a house, I understand that. Credit card debt. I think one of my greatest counseling moments of all was a guy came in and he said, I don't know what I have to say. I don't know how to say it. But he started gambling, playing blackjack at the casino in St. Louis. And he had gone through every bit of their cash. He had taken out a second mortgage and gone through that. He maxed out every credit card he had. And his last ditch was he still had a Sears card that had some limit on it. And he was going to Sears stores in St. Louis, buying power tools and taking them to another Sears store and returning them and getting cash and then going to the boat. It was a great conversation to have with his wife. That's gambling, that's one thing, but just debt complicates so many things. Proverbs says, the borrower is slave to the lender. I don't know how you get around that, but get out of debt, right size your expenses. And I don't know what that means, but don't obligate yourself. And we live in a society that is all, you need a streaming TV service. Well, it's only $6 a month. And you need this subscription, and it's only $12 a month, and it just goes on and on. And I'm just amazed when couples come in with marriage problems, and we discover it's money, and we sit down and finally look at the obligations they have created, that they have made their life more complicated than they can ever imagine. And yeah, you got to think about the future. I don't want to get into that a lot, but would you agree financial matters are an issue? And I don't know how you get them all under control. And let me just say, stuff happens. The unexpected happens, which I guess means it wasn't unexpected, right? But this whole concept of getting your finances in order is a big step to spiritual peace. And I think that and Dave Ramsey has the Financial Peace University. How many of you have done that, gone through that information? Okay, we in our church in Effingham, we basically gave it for free. Actually, I think we asked people to pay something because we figured if they paid a little bit, they'd finish the course. But I think we had like 50 or 60 families went through Financial Peace. It's a big deal. Well, physical surroundings. This is just a really fun one. The hoarder's business. But I would say to you from a spiritual context, it is hard to be spiritually in order when your surroundings are in chaos. Now, if you have preschoolers, God have mercy on your home. I thank you for that. I like that. They just come with more stuff. Preschoolers do. That's just part of the deal. You can't, of course, we were talking about growing up when we didn't have car seats. We just threw them in the car and took off. But now you got to have, a U-Haul to carry enough stuff to take care of your toddler. But there is something, and I have visited in hundreds of homes. I grew up in the day when pastors knocked on the door, and now people don't really, they kind of frown on it. They're not too quick about, you can talk to them at the door, but you just kind of go in and you just get a sense, is this a house that's in order or is this a house that's in disorder? And there is something about clean, and there's no biblical statement about cleanliness is next to godliness, but there is something about keeping your surroundings in some kind of organized manner that I think is an accent towards spiritual peace. I think it's hard to be spiritually calm when your surroundings are not in order. Now, don't be hitting your wife or your husband. And it came up this week. Ralph Vail told me he was visiting with a gentleman, and when he went to see him, the wife was out on the porch sitting on a couch or a little chair, and the husband was in the house vacuuming. And Ralph said, "How did you get that to happen?" And she said, "Well, when I had my hysterectomy 15 years ago, when I came home, he asked me what the doctor said I could and couldn't do, and I told him I couldn't vacuum. I just didn't say it was for 6 weeks." I just love that. So I would also say, if you're a couple, it's not bad to work together to have your settings. And by the way, I've talked to some widows who've never written a check in their life, never paid a bill, didn't know what their mortgage was, didn't know anything about their finances. That just ought not to be. I've known a couple of men who, when their wife died, were clueless about what went on. Now, it's okay to have somebody who does most of the bills, but you both ought to know. You both ought to have a say. You both ought to be a part of it. And so there's that element of being together. Clean and picked up. Deal with stuff. Karen and I moved this year. I would recommend that every few years just for the sanity that it brings. Because for one thing, you go through and realize how much stuff you got. Dostadning is a word I came up when I was doing all this. It's a Scandinavian word, and it means death cleaning. And it's the idea of older parents going through all your junk so that your kids don't have to when you're gone. And so we've kind of played that out. We have also come to the conclusion My children don't want any of my stuff. They don't want your stuff. You may think it's really cool stuff. It may remind you of something really cool when you were 16, but they could care less. They don't want your stuff. But it was a good thing. Karen and I moved from Effingham. We had 3,200 square feet of house. We moved to Effingham, had a big garage, big storage unit, and we moved into a little 1,200 square foot house, 2-bedroom, with one garage. Man, we got rid of stuff. And we do yard sales, but I never worry about making money. Karen will put a price on, and I think it ought to be half of that. I just want people to come to my yard sale and say, man, that was the best yard sale. We got deals like you wouldn't believe. And I just figured if they could pay a quarter and feel great about it. The only thing is I did have some guys who came and bought all my stuff, and then they sold it in their yard sale. I know they did. Sell it, give it away, donate it, throw it away. It's just not bad to go through the stuff. And most of us, how many of you been on an overseas mission trip? Okay, been to a third world country? When you go to some place where everybody I've ever known who's done that, and I think Shaylee will come back that way, there's a period of time where you just feel guilty, almost ashamed that I've got so much stuff. I've got this many pieces of clothing, some I've not worn for 10 years, and I've been in a country where if somebody has 2 shirts or 1 pair of pants or 1 dress, they're thrilled. Most of us just got so much stuff. And I'm not going to say it's wrong, but sometimes it's not bad to just stop spiritually and to be able to say, was this the best use of God's gifts? Because spiritually, all stuff is a gift from God. Every good and perfect gift comes from the Father of lights, in whom there's no darkness. So everything good's come from Him. So there's this question of, do I really need all this stuff? And what's the little Asian lady who cleans your house, tells you what to get rid of? She's but she's got the thing, do I need it? Do I use it? Do I love it? That's her big thing. Do you love it? Coda, anyway. But when we were cleaning the house to get to a smaller house, there was a lot of stuff we got rid of. And we start out with the kids. Do you want anything? Zip. They didn't want any of it. I even offered to deliver some of it. Nope. I'm holding out. I got some Amish furniture. I'm hoping that they'll want the dining room set. We'll see. Probably not. My wife does have, I think, pretty much every Monkees record that was ever made from her days in junior high, so I'm hoping somebody will want those. Financial matters, physical surroundings, time and commitments to make your life simpler. How often during a week do you say, I don't have time? How often during the week, I'm too busy? How often during the week was there something that I needed, something that really was important, but I didn't feel like I had the time? I don't know how you do this. Priority, procrastination. Jesus talked about looking forward at the plow and not looking back. That was about don't get distracted. There's a lot of biblical things about being with a sense of priority. I had a thing that came up on my phone the other day that said, you used your phone 30 minutes more this week than you used it last week. That was kind of a wake-up call. Well, I don't know. That may or may not have been a good thing to have done that. The concept of Sabbath, by the way, is pretty biblical. The idea is that did God rest on the seventh day because He was tired? I don't think so. I think on the seventh day He created rest because He knew the man He had just created on the sixth day was going to be an idiot sometimes and really needed to slow down and take a break. And a Sabbath, In fact, it's kind of interesting, since Labor Day weekend's coming up, if you look at the Old Testament festivals and the feasts, there's like 7 3-day weekends built in, where, okay, there's a regular Sabbath, but then there's a special Sabbath, and then there's another day to get ready for that, and it's like God just said, every once in a while, you need a few extra days, and He threw some of those again. And they were all about spending time with who? Your family. I love tabernacles, the Feast of Booths. Basically, you camped out with your kids in the backyard for 3 days. Was that not a cool thing? And God knew what He was doing. He put that into there. There are just some really powerful things there. Sabbath, I don't know, you're getting a new pastor. I would encourage you to think after he's been here for a while about a sabbatical. I went 20 years at Effingham before we figured out and arranged for a sabbatical, and I took 3 months off. And it was actually some of the best time for the church. We brought somebody else in to preach, and the staff did some extra things, and I was gone, and I listened to other people preach, and Karen and I, she got stuck sharing me with the church for years. So she was just thrilled. We actually sat together in church. It was kind of a new thing. We didn't do that very often. Family relationships, I will say, they are messy. I mean, if I had to be related to some of you, I would wonder about it. I mean, I'm sorry. I know some of you, and just to be related to you, they're complicated, they're messy, but they are some of God's greatest blessings and the greatest sense of joy. And so I don't know. We'll get back to more serious Bible study next week. But when we started on this order thing, this one is one that I'm not sure that I understand simplicity. And Karen and I struggle with that, and we plan trips, and we plan to do this, and we plan to do that. But to make your finances calmer, simpler, your schedule simpler, your life simpler, your surroundings simpler. There's a pastor in Emmanuel in Benton who goes to a monastery where they have the rule of silence during the day. And he'll go there for 3 days just for a personal retreat. Now, he doesn't buy into all the other stuff, but he will go there and stay in this simple little room where there's nothing very much at all, no TV, no cell phones, nothing, but just to read and to pray and to be silent and to walk and to let God speak. So, well, okay, that was all for, I hope I really complicated your life by telling you about being more simple. But maybe there's something good. But that whole concept of, Paul said, I'm boasting about the fact that when we were with you, we were sincere, we were straightforward, and we did it with simplicity. That's probably good. Well, I'm still going to wrestle with that one, but it's good. Other prayer requests. I tell you what's going on outside still. Soccer is exciting.